Princess Ilara Nixvalen pressed her palm against the seeping wound in her side, her silver blood gleaming between her fingers in the fading light. The ambush had separated her from her royal guard, leaving her vulnerable in this desolate stretch of contested territory. Her escape pod had crashed 3 kilometers back, and the emergency beacon had been damaged beyond repair. "Ancestors guide me," she whispered, her violet eyes scanning the horizon. The border outpost lay in ruins around her, caught in the crossfire between Asterian and Earth Coalition forces. Her royal markings, iridescent patterns flowing from her temples down her neck, were concealed beneath a temporary pigment that made her appear as a common Asterian soldier. If the humans discovered her true identity, the fragile ceasefire negotiations would crumble. Pain lanced through her body as she dragged herself behind a fallen support beam. The stimulant injector in her combat suit had administered the last of its reserves, and her consciousness was beginning to fade. Her species' natural regenerative abilities were overwhelmed by the toxins from the human weapons. Ilara bit her lip, tasting her own metallic blood. Dying here would be a disgrace to the 12 generations of Nixvalen rulers before her. A sound, boots on gravel, sent her hand to her sidearm. Her breathing slowed as she aimed at the approaching figure. Lieutenant Marcus Tanner moved cautiously through the ruins, his rifle raised. The ambush had separated him from his squad, and comms were jammed across the sector. Intelligence had reported Asterian forces retreating from this zone, but experience had taught him that intelligence was often wrong. Movement caught his eye, a flash of silver against the dull rubble. Blood. Not red, but silver. Asterian blood. "I see you," he called out, keeping his weapon trained on the position. "I'm Lieutenant Tanner, Earth Coalition. Identify yourself." Silence answered him. Marcus inched closer, his combat sensors picking up a faint life sign. "I'm approaching. I'm not looking for a fight." When he rounded the beam, he found her, an Asterian soldier, wounded but defiant, a pistol aimed directly at his chest. "Stay back, human," Ilara hissed, her accent making the words sharp. "Or I will end your miserable existence." Marcus assessed her quickly. The wound was severe, her silver blood soaking through her combat suit. Without treatment, she had hours at most. He lowered his weapon slightly. "You need medical attention." "I need nothing from your kind," she spat, but her arm trembled from the effort of holding the weapon. Marcus sighed and slowly placed his rifle on the ground. "Look, we can shoot each other, or we can acknowledge that we're both screwed if we stay here. Enemy patrols are sweeping this sector. They'll be here within the hour." "Enemy?" Ilara's eyes narrowed. "Whose enemy? Does it matter? The Secaran mercenaries don't care which side we're on. They're scavenging the battlefield, killing survivors from both armies." As if summoned by his words, the distant whine of Secaran hover vehicles echoed across the ruins. Ilara's weapon lowered fractionally as she calculated her diminishing odds. "I can move on my own," she insisted, attempting to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and only Marcus's quick reflexes prevented her from collapsing. His hands caught her shoulders, and she recoiled from his touch as if burned. "Don't touch me. Your hands defile royal," she stopped herself, eyes widening at her near admission. Marcus frowned but chose to ignore the slip. "You have 2 choices, let me help you, or die here. I won't leave you to those scavengers." "You would help an enemy soldier?" Suspicion colored her voice. "I'm helping a person who needs it." He extended his hand. "Your call, but make it fast." The hover vehicles were growing louder. Ilara's training demanded she die with honor rather than accept help from a human. Yet something in his eyes, determination, perhaps, or a stubborn decency her people claimed humans lacked, made her hesitate. "If you touch me inappropriately, I will kill you slowly," she warned. A wry smile touched his lips. "Noted." With reluctance burning through her pride, Elara allowed him to lift her. His strength surprised her. Humans were supposed to be weaker than Asterians. As he carried her away from the ruins, she maintained her rigid posture, refusing to relax against his chest despite the pain tearing through her side. "This changes nothing between our people," she murmured, fighting unconsciousness. "Never thought it would," Marcus replied, ducking into a narrow passage between collapsed structures. "But right now, it's just you and me trying to survive the night." As darkness fell across the battlefield, Elara's last conscious thought was that for the first time in her royal life, her fate rested entirely in human hands, a disgrace her ancestors would never forgive. The abandoned mining facility loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette against the crimson sky. Marcus adjusted Elara's weight in his arms as he navigated the treacherous terrain. She had drifted in and out of consciousness for the past hour, occasionally murmuring commands in her native tongue. "Just a little further," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him. They had narrowly escaped the Secaran patrol, ducking into a drainage tunnel as the mercenaries combed the ruins. Now, with night falling and Elara's condition deteriorating, Marcus needed to find shelter and treat her wound. The facility's entrance was partially collapsed, but he managed to squeeze through, carrying the alien princess with careful precision. Inside, emergency lights still functioned on auxiliary power, casting an eerie blue glow across the deserted corridors. "Put me down," Elara demanded suddenly, her voice weaker than before but no less imperious. Marcus complied, helping her sit against a wall while he secured the entrance. When he returned, she was examining her wound with clinical detachment. "The toxin is spreading," she said flatly. "Your human weapons are barbaric," says the species with disintegration rifles, Marcus retorted, kneeling beside her. He removed his medkit from his tactical vest. "I need to clean and seal this wound." Elara's eyes flashed with alarm. "You will not touch my bare skin." "Then you'll die," he stated plainly. "And I didn't carry you for 3 kilometers just to watch that happen." Their gazes locked in silent battle. Finally, Elara's shoulders slumped slightly, the closest thing to surrender a royal would allow. "Proceed," she conceded, her tone making it sound like a grand favor. Marcus worked methodically, cutting away the damaged section of her combat suit. The wound was worse than he'd feared, an ugly gash where the toxin-laced shrapnel had penetrated her side. Her skin was unnaturally warm to the touch, and the iridescent patterns that had begun to appear around the wound concerned him. "Your disguise is failing," he noted, gesturing to the markings. "These patterns, they're royal identifiers, aren't they?" Elara tensed. "You are more observant than most humans." "For years of special ops in the border territories," he explained, applying a neutralizing agent to the wound. "I've seen enough Asterians to know the difference between nobility and common soldiers." She hissed as the medicine made contact with her torn flesh. "Yet you still help me, knowing I am your enemy?" "I told you before, right now, we're just 2 people trying to survive." As Marcus worked, Elara studied him, his focused expression, the careful precision of his movements. His hands were gentle despite their strength, and he showed none of the disgust or superiority her people claimed humans exhibited toward Asterians. "Why did you become a soldier?" she asked suddenly, needing distraction from the pain. He smiled faintly, not looking up from his work. "Family tradition. 5 generations of tanners have served. My father expected it." He secured a healing patch over her wound. "What about you? Do Asterian princesses typically join the military?" "All royals serve," she replied, wincing as he tightened the bandage. "It is how we earn the right to rule." A distant explosion shook the facility, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Marcus moved to the small viewport, scanning the horizon. "Coalition forces are advancing," he reported. "We're caught between them and the Secarans." "Then we die here," Elara stated matter-of-factly. Marcus turned to her, determination hardening his features. "Not on my watch, princess." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, made Alara's defenses waver. No one in her life had ever spoken to her with such casual confidence, such complete disregard for her station while simultaneously showing such dedication to her survival. "You are a strange human, Lieutenant Tanner." "Marcus," he corrected, returning to check her bandages. "If we're going to die together, you might as well use my first name." Despite herself, Alara felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. "You may call me Alara, then. But only until we reach safety. After that, proper protocols will resume." "Of course, Your Highness," he replied, with just enough irreverence to make her narrow her eyes. As night fully descended and the sounds of distant battle echoed outside, Alara found herself watching Marcus as he prepared their meager defenses. For the first time in her life, she was facing death not as a princess surrounded by loyal guards, but as a wounded soldier dependent on an enemy's kindness. Most disturbing of all was the realization that she was beginning to trust him. 3 days had passed since they'd taken refuge in the mining facility. Outside, a toxic dust storm raged, nature's contribution to the already deadly landscape. Inside, the unlikely pair had settled into an uneasy coexistence. Alara sat cross-legged on a makeshift bed of emergency blankets, her wound healing faster than Marcus had expected. The royal Asterian bloodline carried enhanced regenerative properties, she'd explained reluctantly. Her disguise had completely faded now, iridescent markings shimmered across her temples and down her neck, disappearing beneath her borrowed coalition undershirt. "Your military rations are surprisingly palatable," she admitted, finishing the last of a protein pack. In the dim emergency lighting, her violet eyes seemed to glow. Marcus smiled, checking the atmospheric sensors he'd rigged near the entrance. "High praise from royalty. Do not mock me, human." "Not mocking. Just surprised you're capable of compliments." The corners of her mouth twitched upward. "Perhaps I am delirious from your primitive medicine." Over the past days, a tentative rapport had developed between them. Necessity had forced conversation, and conversation had revealed unexpected commonalities. Both were second children in their families. Both had rejected easier paths to prove themselves worthy. The storm's intensifying, Marcus noted, returning to sit across from her. "We're stuck here another day at least." Alara nodded, then winced slightly as she shifted position. "Still hurting?" he asked. "It is nothing." "Right. Because Asterian princesses don't feel pain." His tone was teasing. She scowled. "We feel it. We simply do not complain about it." Without warning, Marcus moved closer, his hand reaching toward her side. Alara tensed, but allowed him to lift the edge of her shirt to examine the healing wound. His fingers brushed her skin, sending an unexpected shiver through her body. "The inflammation's down," he observed, seemingly oblivious to her reaction. "But you should still move carefully." Alara found herself studying his face, the strong jawline, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the intensity in his eyes as he concentrated. When had this human become more than just an enemy soldier to her? "In my palace," she said suddenly, "there are 23 handmaidens whose sole purpose is to attend to my body. No man may touch me without formal permission granted by the High Council." Marcus withdrew his hand immediately. "I didn't mean to. Yet here I am," she continued, "allowing a human soldier to tend my wounds, to see me vulnerable." Her voice softened. It is strange how quickly necessity dismantles tradition. Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken implications. "Tell me about Earth," Alara requested, changing the subject. "Not the strategic information in our military briefings, but your experience of it." Marcus leaned back against the wall. "I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, forests so dense you can't see the sky, lakes so clear you can count pebbles 20 feet down. It rains nearly every day, but it's a gentle rain, not like the acid downpours in the contested zones. As he spoke of home, his voice warmed, and Alara found herself entranced by his descriptions of Earth's wild beauty, so different from the sculpted perfection of Asterian architecture. "Your planet sounds untamed," she observed. "That's its appeal," he replied. "What about your homeworld?" Alara's expression grew distant. "Asteria Prime is order incarnate. Every building, every garden, every social interaction follows precise protocols established millennia ago." She paused. "It is beautiful, but sometimes suffocating?" Marcus suggested. Their eyes met, and Alara felt a jolt of recognition. This human understood something about her that she rarely acknowledged to herself. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Precisely that." The emergency lights flickered suddenly, plunging them into momentary darkness. When the dim blue glow returned, they found themselves sitting closer than before. "If we survive this," Marcus said, his voice low, "will you pretend none of this happened? Return to being the untouchable princess?" The question struck at Alara's core. Protocol demanded one answer, but the woman she was becoming in this dark sanctuary wanted something else entirely. "I don't know," she whispered, honesty replacing royal certainty. Without conscious thought, her hand moved to cover his. Their fingers intertwined, a simple touch that violated a dozen Asterian taboos. Outside, the storm howled its fury. Inside, in the blue-tinged darkness, a princess and a soldier discovered that the space between enemies was smaller than either had been taught to believe. The storm had finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. Dawn broke over the wasteland as Marcus and Alara prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary. Their supplies were dwindling, one day's rations remained, and Marcus's medkit was nearly depleted. "The neutral outpost is 15 kilometers east," Marcus said, studying the topographical map on his tactical display. "If we maintain a steady pace and avoid detection, we should reach it by nightfall." Alara nodded, adjusting the makeshift sling he had fashioned for her plasma pistol. Her wound had healed enough for travel, though a dull ache persisted. She caught him watching her movements with concern. "I am fully capable of the journey," she stated firmly. "Never doubted it," he replied with that half-smile that had become infuriatingly familiar. They set out as the first sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the scarred landscape. The second, smaller sun would rise within the hour, bringing with it dangerous heat. This contested moon, once a mining colony, had become strategic territory in the war, valuable for its rare minerals and its position on the border between human and Asterian space. They walked in comfortable silence, each alert for danger. Occasionally their hands would brush, sending electric awareness through Alara's body. Each time, she told herself to maintain distance, and each time, she found herself walking closer to him again. "There's a ridge ahead," Marcus pointed. "We should scout it before crossing the exposed ground." As they approached, he gestured for her to wait while he crawled forward to assess the terrain. Alara found herself admiring his tactical instincts. He moved with the precision of an Asterian elite guard, despite being merely human. "Clear," he called softly. They continued their journey, pausing only briefly at midday to rest in the shadow of a wrecked transport vessel. As Marcus shared their water ration, his fingers lingered against hers. "When we reach the outpost," he began hesitantly, "what happens then?" Alara lowered her gaze. "My royal guard will be searching for me. There will be an extraction protocol in place. And I become the enemy again." She looked up sharply. "Is that not what we are? Enemies temporarily aligned by circumstance?" Marcus held her gaze. "Is that all this has been to you?" The question hung between them, demanding truth where diplomacy would have been easier. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But my duty." "I know about duty," he interrupted gently. "Family legacy, right? 5 generations of Tanners serving the coalition. 26 generations of Nixvalan rulers, she countered. My bloodline is considered sacred. To compromise it would be treason, he supplied. Heresy. The weight of her world's expectations pressed down on her. Yet sitting here, with this human who had saved her life repeatedly, those expectations felt increasingly hollow. They continued their trek as the dual suns began their descent. The neutral outpost appeared on the horizon, a collection of prefabricated structures flying the white flag of the Galactic Concord. We should reach it within 2 hours, Marcus noted. A sudden blast struck the ground near their feet, sending them diving for cover behind a rock formation. Secaran mercenaries had found them, 3 hoverbikes closing fast. Stay down, Marcus ordered, raising his rifle. He fired with precision, disabling one bike, which crashed in a spectacular explosion. Return fire peppered their position, chipping away at their cover. Elara drew her plasma pistol. On my mark, she commanded with instinctive authority. 3, 2, 1. They rose in unison, their weapons finding targets with practiced ease. The remaining mercenaries fell, but not before a blast grazed Marcus's shoulder, leaving a smoldering wound. Marcus. Elara was at his side instantly, applying pressure to the injury. I'm fine, he insisted, though pain etched lines around his eyes. We need to move before more arrive. They pushed forward with renewed urgency, Elara supporting him now as darkness fell. When they finally stopped to rest in a small cave, the outpost was tantalizingly close, less than 3 kilometers away. Tomorrow, Marcus murmured, his voice tightened by pain, you'll be safe. The finality in his tone made Elara's chest constrict. In the ambient glow of his tactical light, she studied his face, memorizing features she would soon be expected to forget. If circumstances were different. She began. But they're not, he finished for her. Acting on impulse rather than protocol for the first time in her life, Elara leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened with shared hunger. His arms encircled her, careful of her healing wound, pulling her closer as if trying to memorize the feel of her body against his. When they finally parted, breathless, she rested her forehead against his. If this is our only night, she whispered, I want to remember all of you. Under the alien stars, royal protocol and military discipline were set aside. For these precious hours, they were not princess and lieutenant, Asterian and human, but simply Elara and Marcus, 2 souls finding connection amid conflict. Tomorrow would bring duty and separation. Tonight belonged only to them. The throne room of the imperial vessel Asteria's radiance gleamed with ceremonial splendor. 2 weeks had passed since Princess Elara Nixvalan had been rescued from contested territory. Her official report mentioned nothing of the human lieutenant who had saved her life, instead crediting her own tactical skills for her survival. Now dressed in royal attire, flowing silver robes that accentuated her iridescent markings, she stood before the High Council as they debated the ceasefire negotiations. The human's proposal is unacceptable, declared Admiral Vex, his aged face stern beneath his ceremonial headdress. They demand joint mining rights to Sector 12. Their casualties were substantial, another counselor noted. Perhaps a limited concession would. We do not concede to lesser species, Vex interrupted. Princess Elara, you have observed humans firsthand in combat. Surely you agree they respect only superior force? All eyes turned to her, expecting the traditional royal disdain for humanity. Instead, Elara saw Marcus's face in her mind, his determination, his compassion, his lips against hers under alien stars. I find, she said carefully, that humans are more complex than our intelligence suggests. Her response drew surprised murmurs. Before further discussion could ensue, her royal communicator chimed. A private message from her intelligence chief, human prisoner transferred to imperial custody. Lieutenant Marcus Tanner, Earth Coalition Special Forces. Captured near neutral zone. Awaiting your orders for interrogation. Ilara's heart stuttered. Marcus, captured. The message continued, subject may have sensitive information regarding your Highness's absence. Recommend immediate termination protocol to protect royal integrity. Her face remained impassive, though her mind raced. To the council, she said, I must attend to a security matter. Please continue without me. In her private chambers, Ilara paced, her royal composure fracturing. Marcus was scheduled for execution, to protect her reputation, to eliminate evidence of her contamination by human contact. The same contact she couldn't stop remembering, couldn't stop craving. Her hand moved unconsciously to her side, where the wound had healed, leaving only a faint silver scar, a permanent reminder of the human who had changed everything. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her handmaiden entered, bowing deeply. The prisoner transfer is complete, Your Highness. The human is in detention cell 3. The elimination is scheduled for dawn. Ilara nodded dismissively, waiting until she was alone before accessing the security feed. There he was, Marcus, bruised but defiant, sitting calmly in his cell. Even now, facing death, he showed no fear. Decision crystallized within her. 26 generations of Nyxvalan rulers had followed tradition blindly. The 27th would forge a new path. Marcus looked up as the cell door opened. Instead of the executioner he expected, Princess Ilara stood before him, resplendent in royal garments. Your Highness, he said softly, rising to his feet. You look different from when I last saw you. As do you. She gestured to his prisoner's uniform. Although the coalition tactical gear suited you better. A ghost of his familiar smile appeared. Not all of us can pull off the glowing royalty look. The guard outside shifted position, and Ilara stepped closer, lowering her voice. Why were you captured? You should have returned to coalition territory. His eyes held hers. You know why. Those 3 words contained everything neither had dared say in the cave that night. Everything they had shown with touch instead of language. They plan to execute you at dawn, she whispered. To erase any evidence of my improper contact with a human. Worth it, he replied simply. Ilara's royal mask slipped, revealing the vulnerability beneath. I've spent every day since our separation trying to forget you. Protocol demands it. My bloodline requires it. Her voice strengthened. But I find I cannot. She pressed her palm to the security scanner. The restraints on his wrists disengaged. What are you doing? He asked, though hope had already begun to brighten his eyes. Choosing, she answered. For the first time in my life. Alarms blared as they raced through the corridors of the Imperial vessel, Ilara leading them through service passages known only to the royal family. Guards shouted, weapons fired, but they pressed on toward the diplomatic shuttle bay. This violates at least a dozen interstellar laws, Marcus said as they sealed the bay doors behind them. 27, actually. Ilara's fingers flew across the shuttle's control panel. Plus every sacred tradition of my lineage. The shuttle engines engaged as security forces began cutting through the doors. Where exactly are we going? Marcus asked, strapping into the co-pilot's seat. The neutral territories, she replied. There's a Galactic Concord outpost on Proxima Station. We can claim asylum while I negotiate terms. Terms for what? Ilara turned to him, determination shining in her violet eyes. For peace. Real peace, not the fragile ceasefire my council and your generals pretend to want. And for us, whatever that might mean. The shuttle broke free of the Imperial vessel just as the bay doors gave way. Pursuing craft scrambled to launch, but Ilara had disabled their immediate response protocols. As they accelerated toward the neutral zone, Marcus reached across the space between their seats, his hand finding hers. "Your people will say I corrupted you," he warned. "That I poisoned royal blood with human influence." "Let them," she replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "Perhaps royal blood needed poisoning. Perhaps tradition without growth is just another form of death." The stars streaked past as the shuttle entered hyperspace. Behind them lay two worlds bound by ancient prejudices and rigid protocols. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and possibility. "We might fail," Marcus said softly. Ilara smiled, not the practiced royal smile of court functions, but the genuine expression he had first witnessed in a cave under alien stars. "We might," she agreed. "But we'll do it together." In the vast expanse of space, a princess who had refused to be saved and the human who had saved her anyway charted a course between their worlds. A new constellation formed from royal blood and stardust, defiance and hope.